He did not say it to wound her. He said it to keep her breathing. With Alaric Hallvard hunting for the one crack in his armor, Soren Viro called the woman who ran his world nothing, staff. Easily replaced. He meant every word as a shield. He never knew she stood behind the frosted glass, close enough to hear it all. By morning her chair sat empty. Her coat was gone, and with it, the only person who saw his enemies coming. The estate glittered like something poured from a mold, and Soren hated every polished inch of it tonight. 200 guests moved through the long glass gallery above the estuary, their laughter thin over the string quartet, their glasses catching alight like small knives. Sleet ticked against the windows. Beyond them, the black water slid past the old rail terminal that had made his family rich and quiet and feared, and none of these people had ever stood on that dock. At 4 a.m, counting crates. They only wanted to be seen standing near a man who had. He stood at the head of the room with a drink he had not touched and let them look. The Alliance had a face, and the face was smiling for a photographer. Ravenna Hallvard wore silver and cold, her pale hair pinned so severely it looked engineered, and when she turned that smile toward him it held exactly nothing. He gave her the same in return. That was the arrangement. Her father's northern territories, married to his river, his laundering spine wrapped around their freight, 2 families folded into one map. No one at this party believed it was love, which was the only honest thing in the building. Whatever you need this to look like, he had told her a week ago. She had answered, try not to look like a man being led to a gallows, and they had understood each other well enough to leave it there. Ravenna leaned in as the photographer reset, her voice pitched under the music, her smile never once slipping. My father likes you, she said. You should be frightened. When Alaric likes a thing, he keeps it. And he has never in his life kept a thing whole. Then she straightened and laughed for the camera at nothing at all, and Soren could not decide whether his bride had just warned him or threatened him, and he was fairly certain she could not decide either. He drank finally, because it gave his hands something to do. His attention drifted, the way it always did, to the edges of the room, not to the guests, to the woman working them. Tamsin Holt moved along the far wall without seeming to move at all. She never took the center of a room. She took its corners, its doorways, its blind spots, and she wore that same gray coat she never once removed indoors, buttoned to the throat as if she might be called outside at any second and did not intend to be caught unready. He had asked her about the coat exactly once years ago. She had said she ran cold. He had let it stand because it was easier than the truth, and because she had never given him a reason to push. She was speaking to no one and hearing everyone. He watched her pause near a knot of Hallvard men, tip her head as if admiring the view, and drift on. In 4 years, he had learned to read that small tilt. It meant she had caught something. She crossed to him without hurry and stopped at his shoulder, close enough that only he could hear. Tell me what you heard, he said quietly. It was the thing he said to her, more than any other. It had become a kind of key between them. 2 of Hallvard's men are counting exits, she murmured, her eyes still on the party, her voice even. Not drunk, not bored, working, and your future father-in-law has asked 3 different people tonight the same question. He wanted to know who you trust. Soren felt the old cold settle into his spine. What did they tell him? They did not know, she said. That is what is bothering me. Every one, he asked, assumed you trust no one, and every one of them was wrong, and none of them knew they were wrong. She finally looked at him, one flick of dark eyes. He is not building a marriage, Soren. He is drawing a map of you, and he is very good at it. Across the room, as if summoned by his own name, Alaric Hallvard turned. He was a broad, unhurried man, with a benevolent grandfather's face and the eyes of something that ate other things to live, and he lifted his glass towards Soren in a slow salute that felt less like a toast than a measurement. Then his gaze slid 1 degree to the left and settled on Tamsin, and stayed there a beat too long. Soren watched the old man look at her the way a buyer looks at a thing whose price has not yet been set. Go, Soren said under his breath. Away from me. Now. Tamsin was already gone, folding back into the crowd before the word finished. But the damage was done, and he knew it. Alaric had followed the one thread in the whole gaudy room that actually held weight, and he had found it standing at Soren's shoulder in a buttoned gray coat. The old man crossed the floor with two of his sons and set a heavy, warm hand on Soren's arm as though they were already family. A beautiful night, Alaric said. A beautiful arrangement. He smiled. Walk with me somewhere the music cannot hear us. There is a thing I would like to understand about you before we are bound, and I think you already know what it is. Tamsin Holt did not go far. She never did. She went exactly as far as usefulness allowed and no farther, to the service corridor behind the gallery where the caterers stacked their trays and the music came through the wall as a muffled heartbeat. And there she pressed her back to the cold plaster and let herself breathe for the length of 10 seconds. That was all she ever allowed. 10 seconds, counted, and then back to work. She had felt Alaric Hallvard's eyes land on her like a hand at the back of her neck, and she understood precisely what it meant, because she had spent her whole life learning to understand exactly that. Being seen was the one thing she could not afford. For 4 years, she had been a smudge at the edge of Soren Vero's life, the aide who remembered names and diffused rooms and carried his coffee and his secrets. And the reason she had survived so long was that no one had ever thought her worth the cost of a second glance. That was over now. Alaric had glanced twice. She pressed her palm flat against the inner pocket of the coat, over the small, hard rectangle sewn into the lining, and made herself take her hand away before anyone could wonder why. The coat stayed on. The coat always stayed on. It was not that she ran cold, though she had let Soren believe it. It was that a woman who keeps her coat on is a woman who can leave a room in one motion, without a backward look, without a trace, and Tamsin had built her entire life around the certainty that one day she would have to. The thing sewn into the lining was proof of a murder 11 years old. It named the man who had truly betrayed the Vero family, the man who had let her father, a good and gentle bookkeeper, take the blame and the bullet for a treason he never committed. She had been a girl when they buried what was left of her father under another family's lie. She had grown up quiet and clever and invisible, and she had found her way into the house of the very people who had killed him, not for revenge, she had told herself, but because the truth was here, and someone had to keep it safe until it was strong enough to be spoken. Somewhere in those 4 years, the lie she told herself had grown a second floor. She had started keeping Soren Vero safe too. She could not have said when it began. She only knew that she read every room he walked into now, and that the reading had stopped being about her father, and started being about the crease that appeared between his brows when he was tired, and that this was the most dangerous thing she had ever let happen to herself. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and Soren leaned through it, and for one unguarded second, his face was only relief. "There you are," he said. He did not come in. He never crowded her. He just stood in the doorway with the party roaring gold behind him, and looked at her as if she were the one solid object in a room full of smoke. "I need you close tonight," he said. "Not far." Something in her chest turned over, warm and treacherous. "I am always close," she said. "I know," he said, and for a moment he seemed about to say something else, something that did not belong to business at all. Then, the moment closed, and he was the boss again. "Hallvard wants a private word with me. Whatever he asks, I want you where you can hear it." "I will hear it," she promised. He held her eyes 1 second longer than he needed to. Then he was gone, and she stood alone in the cold corridor, with her heart doing something foolish. And she did not yet know that the next words she heard him say would be about her, and would take everything she had built apart in the space of a single breath. The room Alaric chose was Soren's own study, which was itself a message. The old man had walked through the estate as though he already owned it, past the portrait of Soren's murdered father, and taken the chair behind Soren's desk uninvited. And Soren had let him, because a man who corrects small insults tells you where his pride lives. Kel shut the door and took the wall. Bastian was already inside. That detail put frost in Soren's blood. Bastian had been his father's oldest friend and the family's counselor for 30 years. The one voice from the old world Soren had never thought to doubt. He stood by the window, with his hands folded, and his kind lined face arranged into patience, not quite meeting Soren's eyes, and Soren filed that away in the cold place, where he kept things he could not yet afford to feel. Alaric spread his broad hands on the desk. "Let us not perform for each other," he said. "Our families are about to share one throat. Before I put my daughter and my freight inside your walls, I need to know where the soft places are. Every man has one. The trick of surviving me is to make sure I never find yours." "I do not have soft places," Soren said. "Everyone does," Bastian said gently from the window. And something in Soren went very still, because Bastian had said it like a man agreeing with the buyer. Alaric smiled at the help. "Your counselor is wise. Here is what troubles me, Soren. A man with no attachments is a man with nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose cannot be trusted to keep a bargain, because a bargain only holds when both men fear the same fire. So, I have spent the evening asking your people what you love." He spread his hands again, and not one of them could tell me. Which means either you are the emptiest man I have ever done business with, or you are the most careful, and I do not sign my daughter over to a mystery. There it was, the whole shape of the trap in one calm sentence, laid on Soren's own desk. Alaric was not looking for Soren's weakness in order to remove it. He was looking for the lever he would pull the moment the ink dried, the person he could put a knife against, to make the great cold Soren Viro kneel. The alliance was not a marriage, it was a search. And Soren already knew the answer to the old man's question. He had known it in the corridor, watching a woman in a gray coat promised she would always be close. The soft place had a name, and if Alaric ever learned it, she was dead. Soren felt the calm come down over him, like a lowered visor. "You want to know what I love," he said. He let the silence stretch until even Alaric leaned in. Then he laughed, low and unbothered, and reached past the old man to pour himself a drink in his own study. "Ask me something harder. I love the river, the rail, and a balance sheet with no red on it. Give me those and you can marry me to a stone." For the first time Alaric looked faintly, dangerously amused. "We shall see," he said, and he rose, and the meeting was over, and Soren had bought exactly one thing with that answer. It was Tamsin who had bought him that answer, though Alaric would never know it. An hour before, she had told him what she heard. He wanted to know who you trust. Without that one sentence, he would have walked in blind and honesty would have killed her. Instead, he had known the question before it was asked, and lied into it smoothly, and the lie had held. He should have felt the win. Instead, he felt only that this had been the polite version, and that Alaric would not ask politely twice. Bastian had watched it all from the window, with the patience of a man waiting to be paid. Soren fixed a smile onto his face for the cameras, and went looking through the crowd for a gray coat. There was only one person in this house he trusted with what he had just understood, and the weakness the old man was hunting, God help them both, was her. Morning came gray and hard off the estuary, and Soren stood at the tall window of his office, with black coffee going cold in his hand, and told himself he had it handled. He had spent most of the night with the numbers, and the numbers, at least, obeyed him. He would sign the alliance. He would let Alaric fold his freight around the river and believe he had won. And somewhere in the machinery of the merger, in a quiet quarter, no contract covered, Soren would find the old man's throat and close his hand around it at the exact moment Alaric stopped watching for it. Patience was the one weapon he had never run short of. He could wait a year. He could wait 2. The soft place stayed safe as long as it stayed nameless. That was the whole of it. Alaric had looked at a woman in a gray coat and felt something worth chasing, but he did not know what she was, and no one who knew was going to tell him. Bastien did not know. Kel did not know. Tamsin herself had made sure, across 4 careful years, that not one living person could draw the line from the aide who fetched his coffee to the architecture that kept him breathing. She had hidden herself better than Soren had ever hidden anything. He had always assumed it was modesty. This morning, it looked like foresight. So he told himself she was safe, and he almost believed it. And then Kel knocked once and came in without waiting, and the look on his face took the coffee straight out of Soren's stomach. 2 men were in the produce market off Farrow Lane this morning, Kel said. Not ours. They were paying a fruit seller to remember a woman. Gray coat, dark hair, walks the same route to the same terminal every morning at 7, never varies. They wanted to know where she sleeps. The office went very quiet. Soren set the coffee down before his hand could betray him. How long? He said. Since last night, Kel said. He hesitated, and Soren watched him choose the next words with the care of a man crossing ice. Boss? They did not have to ask hard. Somebody pointed them at Farrow Lane. They knew the neighborhood before they got there. They were confirming, not searching. There it was, not a hunt anymore, a hand already reaching. He had gone home and put men on it before the string quartet had packed its instruments, which meant Soren had misread the whole thing. He had thought he had a year. He had thought the polite version bought him time. Alaric had never been polite. He had been early. And someone had pointed the way, someone who knew that the quiet one in the gray coat mattered, and knew which lane, and knew the 7 o'clock walk. Soren ran the short, ugly list of people who could have known all 3, and the list had one name on it that he did not want to write, a name attached to a kind-lined face that had stood at his father's grave and wept. He shut the thought in a drawer where he kept the things he could not yet afford to be right about, and he turned back to the one problem in front of him that he could actually put his hands on. Put 2 of ours on her quietly, Soren said. She does not see them. She does not know. Cal frowned. She sees everything. Then, make them better than everything, Soren said, and heard how thin it sounded even as he said it, because there was no one better than everything. There was only her, and she was already walking a marked route to a marked terminal while men she had not yet noticed learned the shape of her life. He had spent one night congratulating himself on a plan, and in that same night, the old man had reached past all of it and put a finger on the only thing Soren could not afford to lose. Get the car, Soren said. I am going to her before she leaves for work. He came to her flat before 7, which he had never once done in 4 years. And Tamsin knew the instant she opened the door and saw his face, that the careful distance they had both guarded so long was already cracking, and that she was going to have to be the one to hold it, because he clearly no longer could. You are leaving the city, Soren said. He did not come in. He stood on her narrow landing in a coat, beaded with sleet, and said it, like a man reading a sentence he had already decided was law. Today. I have a house in the south, past the border, quiet, warm. You will be safe there, and you will stay there until I send for you. No, she said, I was not asking. I know, she said. The answer is still no. She stepped back to let him in, because the neighbors did not need to hear this, and he filled her small, clean room the way weather fills a valley, and she folded her arms over her buttoned coat, and made herself look immovable while her heart did something enormous behind her ribs. He had come himself, before dawn, because he was afraid for her. She had spent 4 years teaching herself that this man would never come, and here he was ruining the lesson. Halvard has men on your street, he said. They know your route. They know your terminal. They are learning where you sleep. He said it flat, but his hands were not flat, his hands were closed hard at his sides. Do you understand what he means to do with you? I understood it at the party, she said gently. Before you did. That stopped him. Then why, in God's name, are you still here? Because if I run, she said, You lose the only person in this city who can tell you what a room is about to do to you. Because the next time you sit across from a man who wants to own you, you will need someone behind the glass telling you the truth of him, and there is no one else. She held his eyes. You do not send your eyes away with the fight this close, Soren. You know that. You taught me that. He looked at her for a long moment, and something moved across his face that she had never been allowed to see, and for one reckless second, she thought he might close the space between them and say the thing that neither of them had ever said in 4 years of standing carefully apart. Instead, he crossed to her one small window and looked down at the street, at the gray, wet morning where somewhere 2 men were memorizing her, and when he spoke, his voice had gone rough. You have kept me alive for 4 years, he said. I never once said it out loud. I let you stand outside my door, and I let the world think you brought me coffee. And the entire time you were the reason I was not dead in the river. He turned. I know what you are, Tamsin. I have always known. And I would rather burn the alliance to the ground tonight than let that old man put one hand on you. You do not know all of it, she almost said. The words rose in her throat, 11 years of them. The frame and the grave and the proof stitched into the lining a handspan from where he stood. He thought he knew what she was to him. He did not know whose daughter she was, or that she had walked into his house carrying the one truth that could burn it to the waterline, or that somewhere along the way she had chosen to guard him with that truth instead of using it. If she told him now, tonight, before the counting house, she would be handing him the weapon he needed. She opened her mouth to give it to him. Then she looked at his face, and she was too afraid of what he might see in hers, and the moment closed over her, the way every such moment had closed for 4 years. The room tilted. It was as close to a confession as either of them had ever come, and she felt the wall she had spent 11 years building crack straight down the middle, and she did the only thing she knew how to do with a feeling that size. She reached out, and for the first time in front of him, she unbuttoned the top button of her coat. Just one, as if to prove to him that she was not going to bolt, that she was choosing to stay in this room with this man and this danger. Then let me do what I am for, she said. Let me be behind the glass one more time. Let me read him for you the way I always have, and when it is done, if you still want to send me to your quiet, warm house, I will think about going. Soren looked at that single undone button, as though she had handed him something breakable. Something in him seemed to give way and steady at once. Behind the glass, he agreed at last, quietly, one last time. And, whatever happens in that room, whatever you hear, I need you to remember this exact moment. Remember that I came here. Remember that I told you the truth. She should have asked him what he meant. She would spend a long time afterward wishing she had asked him what he meant. But he was already at the door, and the morning was already gone, gray and cruel around them, and she only nodded and buttoned her coat back to the throat and let him go. The summons came at noon, hand-delivered on paper thick as cloth. Alaric requested the pleasure of Soren's company that evening at the terminal counting house to settle the last small matter of trust before the families signed. Bring your household, the note said. I like to know the faces I am marrying into. Soren read it twice and understood it completely. It was not a dinner, it was an examination. Alaric would sit him at a table, surround him with his own people, and watch, with those patient eating eyes, how Soren moved among them. He would name each one. He would gauge which faces made Soren careful. And when he found the face that Soren protected, the face Soren's voice softened for or hardened around, he would know he had found the lever. And tomorrow that face would vanish into a Halvard car and Soren would sign anything, do anything, kneel anywhere to get it back. Bring your household. Bring the quiet one in the gray coat so I can watch you look at her. He thought of Ravenna at the party, leaning into the camera light, to tell him he should be frightened, that her father had never in his life kept a thing whole. He had taken it for cruelty, or for theater. Now, he turned it over in the dark, and found it was neither. It was a warning, offered by a woman who had grown up inside the machine that was closing on him, and who perhaps hated it as much as he did. He filed her away with the rest. There might, one distant day, be a use for a bride who did not love her father. Soren sat with the note for a long time, while the gray afternoon burned down toward dark. Then he sent for Kel, where Bastian went after the party, Soren said. Kel did not pretend not to understand. To the Harbor Hotel, he said. The one Halvard took over for his people. He was there 90 minutes. He came out lighter than he went in, boss, like a man who had set something down. So there it was laid on the desk beside the thick paper, the second half of a thing Soren had spent the morning refusing to finish. Bastien had pointed them at Faro Lane. Bastien, who had known Tamsin's route because Bastien had helped Soren build the household, had walked into Alaric's hotel and sold the only name that mattered, and then come out lighter, absolved, and paid. The oldest friend of Soren's murdered father had been for sale the whole time, and Soren had been too busy admiring his own patience to smell it. It was not the danger that sat wrong in him. He had lived his whole life inside danger. It was the wedding at the graveside, the man who had taught him to knot a tie and hold a gun and bury a father, walking into a harbor hotel to sell the one person that same father would have told him to guard with his life. Soren let himself feel the whole weight of it for exactly as long as it took to cross the room to the window. Then he set it down with everything else. He could not move against Bastien yet. If Bastien vanished tonight, Alaric would know he was burned, and Alaric would simply take Tamsin faster. No, Bastien had to keep believing the sale had worked. Everyone in that counting house tonight had to believe exactly one thing, and Soren, staring into the dark water, understood with a cold and total clarity what that thing was and what it was going to cost him. He had already tried every other door and found them nailed shut. He could not kill the old man tonight, not in a counting house full of Halvard guns, with the ink not yet dry. He could not run with her, because a man who runs confirms he is carrying something worth the chase. He could not send her away, because she had already refused to go, and the men on Faro Lane would follow her out of the city as easily as around it. And he could not leave her home, because an empty chair at that table would shout as loudly as any softness in his voice. Every road out of the trap curved back into its jaws. There was exactly one road through, and it ran directly over her. They were watching to see what he loved, so he would show them a man who loved nothing. He would sit at Alaric's table, and he would let the old man walk his gaze across every face, and when it stopped on the gray coat, when Alaric turned and asked, with that grandfather's smile, "And this one, Soren, what is this one to you?" Soren would look at Tamsin Holt as though she were a chair. He would call her Staff. He would say that if she walked out the door tonight and never came back, he would not notice by morning. He would make it so flat and so bored and so final that the best reader of rooms in the city would find nothing under it to doubt, because the whole point, the terrible engine of it, was that it had to fool her, too. If Tamsin flinched, if her eyes so much as flickered with the knowledge that it was theater, Alaric would see the theater, and the shield would become a target painted over her heart. To save her, the lie had to be perfect. To be perfect, it had to be believed by the one person in the world he least wanted to wound. And he could not warn her. Bastien would be in the room. And Bastien watched faces too. If Soren so much as passed her a look that said, "Forgive me," the whole fragile machine would show its gears. He thought of her undoing that single button in her cold little room. "Remember that I came here. Remember that I told you the truth." He had known, even then, standing at her window, that he was going to have to do this. He had gone to her at dawn and laid down one true moment for her to hold on to, because he had already seen that by nightfall he would hand her the cruelest lie of his life and would not be able to take it back or explain it while it mattered. Soren set the note down and stood, and his reflection stood with him in the black window, a man about to protect the thing he wanted most by teaching it to hate him. "Get the car," he said to no one, to the room, to the dark. "It is time to go and break her heart to keep it beating." If a story ever earned a moment to breathe before the worst of it, it is this one. Stay with them. What happens in that counting house is the hinge the whole night turns on. The counting house at the terminal had been built 100 years ago to weigh other people's money, and it still smelled of old iron scales and colder stone. And Tamsin stood in the narrow mezzanine gallery above the long table exactly where Soren had asked her to stand. Behind the tall panel of frosted glass that let the sound of the room climb up to her, but kept her from the eyes below. She had done this 100 times. She was his ears. She watched the shapes of the men move behind the milky glass like fish under ice, and she listened to the true meaning under the words, and every few minutes she would breathe a single sentence into the small microphone at her collar, and 3 floors of nothing between them. Soren would hear the truth of the room in the bud he wore in one ear. That was the machine they had built. That was what she was for. Below, Alaric Hallvard was enjoying himself. He had spent the first hour being charming, and the charm was the knife. He praised Soren's terminal, he praised Soren's river. And then, over glasses no one drank from, he began to walk his questions around the table, one man at a time, the way a farmer walks a pen, deciding which animal eats and which one does not. And this one, Soren. He named Kell and watched Soren's face. He named the harbor captains and watched Soren's face. He was hunting the flicker, the softening, the one name that would make the great cold man across the table careful. And Tamsin, reading him from above, understood with a lurch of pure cold fear that the old man already suspected where to look. "Bring your household," the note had said. She had known, buttoning her coat that evening, that she was walking into the mouth of the thing. She had not been afraid for herself. She was never afraid for herself. She had been afraid that Soren's eyes would betray him, that 4 years of standing carefully apart would fail him in the 1 second it mattered. She should have been afraid of the opposite. "And this one," Alaric said, and Tamsin felt the whole room turn, felt it through the floor, and she did not need to see to know that the old man had lifted one thick finger toward the gallery, toward the frosted glass, toward her. "The quiet one you keep upstairs, the one in the gray coat who came to your party and spoke to no one and heard everyone," he let it hang. "I confess, she is the only face here I cannot price. So tell me, and tell me plainly, because we are almost family, what is she to you?" Tamsin went very still behind the glass. There was a pause below, and in the pause, she made the mistake of hoping. She thought, he will deflect, he will make a joke of the river and the rail, the way he did last night, he will slide out from under it, the way he always does. She pressed her fingers to the cold glass and waited for him to be clever. Soren's voice came up through the floor, and it was bored. "Her," he said. He might have been asked about a filing cabinet. "She is staff. She keeps the appointments and she remembers the names. I cannot be bothered to." He let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. "You have spent an hour trying to find a soft place in me, Alaric, and you have settled on the help. I will save you the evening. If that woman walked out of this building tonight and never came back, I doubt I would notice before 9 tomorrow morning, when no one brought my coffee. By noon, I would have replaced her. By the end of the week, I would not remember her name." Somewhere far away, Tamsin heard Alaric laugh, satisfied at last. She did not hear the rest. The rest was only weather. She stood behind the frosted glass with her hand flat against it, and let the words go through her, one at a time, would not notice, replaced her, would not remember her name, and each one landed exactly where 4 years of hope had been keeping a small, foolish lamp lit, and put it out. She had told herself so many careful lies to survive this man, and the largest of them, she understood now with a terrible clarity, was that she had ever been anything to him at all. He had come to her flat at dawn. He had said, "I know what you are." She had unbuttoned a button, and it had all been the management of a useful thing, the soothing of a tool that had started to rattle. And she had been stupid enough, after 11 years of never once being stupid, to believe it was tenderness. She thought of the dawn, of the way he had looked at her as if she were the one solid thing in a room full of smoke, and she turned the memory over and found the ugly hinge in it. A tool that begins to rattle is soothed, not discarded, until the hour it can be. He had needed her steady for one more night, and he had gotten it. She did not cry. She was proud of that, later, in the way you are proud of a scar. She simply took her hand off the glass, and she took the small microphone from her collar and set it down on the ledge so gently it made no sound. And she turned and walked to the gallery stairs. The coat had always been for this. She understood that too. Now, as she went down the dark back stair with her heart a cold stone and her steps making no more noise than they ever had, she had built her whole life to be able to leave a room in one motion, without a backward look, without a trace, and she had told everyone she ran cold. She had never once let herself belong to anything, so that when the day came, and it had come, she could do exactly this: walk, button to the throat, gone. He said he would not notice by morning. She stepped out of the counting house into the black, wet night, and the sleet took her, and she pulled her collar up, and she made him a silent promise as she went. The only promise she had left to give him. She would make it true. Soren held the performance for another 40 minutes, because to break it was to reveal it, and so he sat at Alaric's table and talked freight and tariffs and the color of the ink they would use tomorrow, and he smiled, and the whole time a part of him was straining upward toward the frosted glass, waiting for her voice in his ear to tell him what the room was doing. It never came. He told himself she had gone quiet because the danger had passed, because Alaric had swallowed the lie and turned his eating eyes elsewhere. He told himself she was still up there reading, steady, that she understood, that she had heard him say those words and known them for the shield they were. He told himself, all the way home through the sleet, that he had done a terrible thing well, and that terrible things, done well, could be mended in the morning. Then he came into his own house, and the coffee thing hit him before he even had the reason for it. The house was too quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of night, the quiet of subtraction. He walked through his own rooms with his coat still on and dripping, and he did not know what he was looking for until he found it, which was nothing, the small nothings of her. The chair at the end of the hall that was always angled just so, angled now the way a chair is angled by someone who has stood up from it for the last time and pushed it in. On the desk outside his study, where for 4 years there had been a woman's careful order, there was a single sheet of paper squared to the edge of the blotter, and on it, in her small, even hand, 4 words: "You will not notice." That was all. She had taken his own sentence, the one he had thrown down the floor of the counting house like a coin, and she had handed it back to him, and it landed in his chest like a blade going in slow. He read it a second time, and a third, the way you press on a wound to be certain it is real. She had not written anything cruel. She had not needed to. She had simply proved in 4 small squared-off words that she had heard him perfectly, that the machine of her attention had worked one last time and delivered her the exact sentence he had spent the whole evening building, and that she had believed it down to the root. He stood there for a long time. Kel found him there. Kel, who did not know the half of it, took one look at the pushed-in chair and the 4 words and the expression on his boss's face, and had the sense to say nothing at all for almost a minute. "She left about an hour ago," Kel said finally. "The 2 men I put on her, boss, they lost her inside 6 streets." He said it like a confession. "I have never seen anyone do that. She walked into the market crowd and she was just gone." He paused. "Where do you want me to look?" And there it was, the entire wreckage laid out cold. Soren had built a lie perfect enough to fool the sharpest reader of a room alive, and it had worked. It had worked completely, and the price of it working was that she had believed it. And the woman who believed she was nothing to him was now walking a hostile city, alone in a gray coat with the only copy of God knew what sewn into its lining. Having shaken off the only two men who might have kept her breathing, he could not chase her. That was the trap, closing its second jaw. If Soren Vero turned the city upside down, looking for a woman he had just called replaceable, every watcher Alaric had would understand in an instant that the great cold man had lied, and the shield would fall, and the target he had drawn over her heart to keep her safe would light up like a struck match. To protect her, he had driven her away, and now, to protect her, he had to let her stay gone. And both of those things were slowly killing him at the same time. He made himself think it through the way she would have, cold and clean. Flood the streets with his men, and Alaric's watchers would read the panic and know the lie, and the shield would fall. Do nothing. And Bastien's men would find her in the dark. The only path was the narrow one she herself would have chosen, a search that looked like nothing at all, run by the 2 or 3 people he could still trust, aimed at reaching her first and telling no one why she mattered. It was correct, and he hated it, and both were true at once. "I do not want you to look," Soren said. His voice did not sound like his own. "I want you to listen. If anyone in this city so much as breathes her description, I want to know before they finish the sentence. Because someone would." That was the part that put ice in his gut as he stood over her 4 small words. The lie had bought Tamsin one kind of safety and torn open another. Bastien knew what she was. Bastien had sold her lane and her route to Alaric already, and Bastien was the one man in the world who might guess that the quiet woman who had just walked away from Soren Vero was not only Soren's eyes but the keeper of something old and dangerous. Soren had made her look worthless to Alaric. He had in the same breath made her look abandoned, unguarded, and alone to the one man who had every reason to want her silenced. He thought again of Bastien, coming out of that harbor hotel lighter than he went in. A man does not sell a name for money alone. He sells it to be rid of a fear. Bastien had just handed Alaric his leverage, and the one person sharp enough to have watched him do it was a woman who missed nothing. Selling her had bought him a partner. But a partner who could still be undone by a perfect memory was a loose end, and Bastien had survived 30 years by never leaving a loose end breathing. He did not want her taken, he wanted her gone. "Get me Bastien's movements," Soren said. "All of them. Tonight." He looked down at the note one more time. "You will not notice." He folded it once along her crease and put it in the pocket over his heart, and understood that he had never in his life noticed anything so much as he noticed her absence in that hour, and that he might have learned it too late to matter. Bastien did not go home that night. That was the first thread, and Soren pulled it. By 2 in the morning, Kel had it. Bastien had put 3 of his own men, quiet ones, old hands, out into the wet streets, and they were not guarding anything, they were sweeping. They were moving through the market quarter in a slow tightening circle with the patience of men who had done this before, and Soren did not need Tamsin's ears to read that room. Bastien had come to the same cold arithmetic. Soren had an hour behind him, and reached the same answer. The woman in the gray coat had walked out from under Vero's protection. She was alone. And if she was what Bastien feared she was, if 11 years of a buried lie had a witness after all, then tonight, while she was unguarded and grieving, and no one would come for her, was the night to bury it again for good. Soren was in the car before Kel finished the sentence. He did not know where she would go, and that nearly broke him. As the car tore through the flooded dark, 4 years beside her, and he could not name a single place she loved because she had made certain he never learned it. A woman who keeps her coat on never tells you where her heart sleeps. So he thought about the parts of herself she had let slip without meaning to, and he remembered her saying once that the only place she had ever liked was the ruined chapel above the old lock, because it was the one high place where you could hear the whole city at once, and no one could climb the stairs behind you. One door, a place you could hear coming. Of course, that was where she would go to bleed. He got there, first. Barely. He came up the black stair of the chapel above the lock 2 steps at a time, and came out into the ruined nave, open to the sleet through a fallen roof, and she was there, a gray shape at the far rail with the whole glittering wet city spread below her. And she turned when she heard him, and even in the dark he could see her face close like a door. "Go back," Tamsin said. Her voice was perfectly steady, which was worse than any breaking. "You said you would not notice, so do not notice. Go home, Soren." "Bastien sent men," he said. He stayed by the stair, hands open, because there were 3 ways up to a woman who reads rooms, and only one of them did not frighten her. "They are sweeping the quarter for you right now. He knows what you are. I need you to come with me before they close the circle." "You need," she repeated, and she laughed, and the laugh had a crack in it at last. "That is the truest thing you have said to me in 4 years. You need." She shook her head. "I heard you tonight. Every word. I stood behind a glass where you put me, and I heard exactly what I am to you. And do you know, the terrible part is that you were right. I built my whole life so that a man like you could throw me away in 1 sentence and lose nothing. You just read it back to me." She pulled her collar higher. "So, thank you. It was a mercy. Now go." He could have argued. He was a man who won arguments. But he had learned that his words were the one currency that would never again be worth anything to her, spent all at once in a bored sentence in a counting house, and that if he tried to explain the shield now, she would only hear a clever man managing a useful thing again. So, he did not explain, he did something else. He reached into the pocket over his heart, and he took out the folded note, her 4 words, softened now with the damp of his coat, and he held it out into the space between them. "You wrote this, and you left it, squared to the edge of the blotter," he said. "Even leaving, you set it straight, because you cannot help it. Because you have spent your whole life keeping other people's houses in order, and never once letting anyone keep yours." He took 1 step. "Tamsin, I have carried this against my chest since I found it, and I have not put it down. And a man does not carry the thing that does not matter to him against his heart in the rain." She stared at the small, ruined square of paper in his hand, and something in her face wavered. And then the stair below them creaked under a weight that was not the wind, and both of them went still. And Soren turned his body between her and the dark of the stairwell, without thinking about it at all, which was the only argument he had left, and the only one that landed. "They are here," she breathed. He put out his hand. Not for her heart, just for her hand. For 1 long second, she looked at it as though it were the most dangerous thing in a city full of men with knives. Then, because the stair was creaking, because the circle had closed, because whatever else was a lie, the reaching hand in front of her was solid and warm, and between her and the dark, Tamsin Holt took it. "I still do not believe you," she whispered, as he pulled her toward the far door, the one that led out onto the roof of the lock, the one she had chosen this place for, because it was a way down no one expected. "You do not have to believe me," Soren said. "You only have to live long enough to catch me proving it." And then, the first of Bastien's men came up out of the stairwell into the ruined nave, and there was no more time for words at all. What happened next happened fast and in the dark, and afterward, Tamsin would remember it only in pieces. Soren moving her behind him. The narrow roof door, the drop to the lock wall, the way down no one expected. Kell's car below with its lights killed, one of Bastien's men close enough that Soren turned and did something quick and final that she made herself not watch. Then, the wet night swallowing them, and her heart hammering a rhythm that was to her horror, not only fear. They did not speak until the safe flat, a cold room above a shuttered chandler's that Soren kept for nights like this. With the door bolted and the hunting city shut out, Tamsin stopped running long enough to make a decision she had been 11 years avoiding. "You want to know what I am," she said. She was still in the coat, and she would stay in it until this was finished. Then I will tell you why. Bastian wants me under the ground, and it has nothing to do with the last 4 years. She reached into the lining over her heart and drew out the small, hard thing she had guarded across a third of her life and set it on the table between them. 11 years ago, someone sold your father to the men who killed him, she said. The family needed a name to bury beside him, so they chose a bookkeeper. A gentleman who kept the ledgers and could not defend himself, because by the time they blamed him, he was already dead. Her voice did not shake. She had practiced not shaking for 11 years. That bookkeeper was my father, and he did not do it. She touched the little drive with one fingertip. The man who did is the man who wept at your father's grave and has been eating at your table ever since. This is the proof. I have kept it in the dark for 11 years, waiting for the day it could finally speak. Soren looked at the small black thing on the table as though it were a live coal. You came into my house, he said slowly, to avenge your father. I came into your house to keep the proof safe, she said. Somewhere in the 4th year, I started keeping you safe too. And I have never forgiven myself for it, because it made me weak, and tonight, you showed me how weak. She lifted her chin, her eyes dry and terrible. But you want Bastien, and I have wanted him since I was a girl, standing at the wrong grave. She nodded at the drive. There is your soft place, Soren, and there is your knife. Stop spending your words on me, because I will never again spend one of mine believing them, and let me show you how we bury him with it. The families met to sign at 10 the next morning, and Soren Viro walked into the counting house looking like a man who had lost. That was the plan, and the plan was hers. Let Alaric believe he had already won. Let him watch Soren, come in grey and hollow, a man whose only useful possession had walked out into the night, a man too gutted to be dangerous. It was the hardest performance of his life, harder than the counting house the night before, because that lie had been armor, and this one was bait. Every man in the room needed to believe the fight had already gone out of him. Kell believed it, almost. Bastien believed it completely, which was the point. And high above them, unseen, a woman who had every reason in the world to let him drown was choosing, for reasons he had not earned, to hand him the rope one last time. Bastien was there at Soren's right hand, wearing that same, gentle, well-worn face, having spent the night believing the woman who could hang him was alone somewhere in the sleet, or already dead in it. Alaric was there at the head of the long table with his sons and his pen, and the contracts that would fold the river into his fist, and behind that, grandfather's smile. Soren could see him, waiting patient, for the ink to dry. He did not know his lover was standing in the mezzanine gallery above them, behind the frosted glass, exactly where she had stood the night before. He did not know that this time she was not there to listen. She was there to be heard. Soren sat. He let Alaric slide the contracts across the stone. He picked up the pen. He let the whole room lean toward the small scratch of a signature that would end the Vero line as anything but a halvard possession. Then he set the pen down. Before we sign, Soren said, I want to give my new family a wedding gift. He nodded up at the gallery. Tamsin? The frosted panel slid back, and she stepped to the rail in the gray coat with a small black drive in her hand, and Soren watched Bastien's kind face turn the color of ash. Alaric's pen stopped moving. Every Halvard son in the room felt the temperature change without understanding it, the way animals feel a storm. 11 years ago, Soren said, still seated, still calm, someone inside my own house sold my father to the men who put him in the ground. I was told the bookkeeper did it, a quiet man, good with ledgers. I was told he took a payment and opened a door, and when they could not find him to answer for it, it was because he was already dead in a canal, which was very convenient for everyone who told me the story. He turned his head, slowly, and looked at the man who had taught him to knot a tie. I believed that story for 11 years. Bastian. I grieved my father, and I hated a dead bookkeeper, and I kept you at my right hand and let you pour the wine. Sorin, Bastian said, and his voice cracked on it, the smooth counsel of 30 years gone, thin as paper. Whatever that woman has told you, she is a liar. She is nobody. She is a clerk with a grudge. She is the bookkeeper's daughter, Soren said. The room went entirely still. And she has spent 11 years keeping the one thing you could not kill, because you did not know it existed. Soren nodded, and above them Tamsin's voice came down clear and even into the silence, reading 3 account numbers, a date, a name, the small, unglamorous machinery of a murder, the wire that had paid for it and the hand that had sent it, and every number she spoke matched a document that slid one by one from the drive to the screen at the end of the table, where Alaric's own men were meant to verify the marriage of 2 fortunes and were instead watching the unmarriage of a lie. Soren heard the numbers fall one by one, and felt each of them land in an old wound he had thought long scarred over. He had spent 11 years building an empire on top of a grave, and the whole time the man who dug it had stood at his shoulder, correcting his posture, pouring his wine, teaching him a patience so deep he would never grow impatient enough to look too closely at the one story he had been handed whole. Every kindness Bastien had ever shown him turned, in the space of a minute, into a lock quietly worked in the dark. His father had been sold by the only man his father trusted, and Soren had inherited both the empire and the traitor, and had guarded the second more tenderly than the first. It was Bastien. It had always been Bastien. He had sold Soren's father, framed a gentle man, buried the proof under a canal, and then stood at the graveside and wept. And he had spent 11 years eating at the table of the sun, and last week he had walked into a harbor hotel and sold that son too, because a man who will drown one master will drown them all. And the only miracle in it was that the drowned bookkeeper had left behind a daughter who did not drown. Alaric Hallvard looked at his inside man for a long, cold moment, and Soren watched the old man do the arithmetic that mattered to him, which was not justice, but this. I have been in bed with a creature who murders the men he serves, and I nearly signed my daughter and my freight into his reach. You wired the payment through a shipping account you opened in my father's own name, Soren said, almost gently, so that if anyone ever went looking, the trail would end at a dead man who could not deny it. That was clever. You were always clever. But you kept the confirmation, because men like you always keep one card, in case a partner turns, and 11 years ago a frightened bookkeeper found that card, and copied it before you drowned him, and handed the copy to a daughter you did not know he had. Everything you built, Bastien, you built on the one thing you could not afford to have be true, which is that the gentleman you murdered was cleverer than you. Bastien saw it too. He saw the last floor fall out from under him, saw Alaric's face close, saw 30 years of usefulness turn to garbage in a single minute, and being a man who had survived his whole life by removing witnesses, he did the only thing his kind ever does when the ledger finally comes due. He went for the witness. He was fast for an old man. He came up out of his chair with a short blade already in his hand, and he did not go for Soren. He went for the stair to the gallery, for the woman at the rail, for the daughter of the man he thought he had erased. And for one heart-stopping second, the whole room was too slow. Kell was not too slow, neither was Soren. It was over quickly, and it was not clean, and Soren would not describe it afterward even to her. He would only say that Bastien did not reach the stair, that the man who had taught him to hold a gun learned at the very end that he had taught him too well, and that the last thing Soren felt looking down was not the triumph he had rehearsed in 11 years of grief. It was something quieter and heavier. It was simply over. He stood over the man who had made him an orphan and felt the 11 years he had spent hating the wrong ghost drain out of him, and leave nothing behind but a great tiredness and, underneath it, the beginning of something he did not yet have a name for. He had always assumed vengeance would feel like winning. It felt instead like setting down a weight he had carried. So long he had mistaken it for his own spine. He looked up. Tamsin stood at the rail, with both hands white on the wood, staring down at him, and for the first time since the night before the terrible steadiness had cracked, and under it he could see her seeing him, seeing what he had just done, in the open, in front of everyone, for a dead bookkeeper he had never met, and a woman he had publicly called nothing. Alaric rose. His sons rose with him, hands drifting toward their coats, and the room stood on the knife of what came next. "You have spilled blood at this table, Vero," Alaric said. "I have killed the man who deceived us both," Soren answered, "and let him hear the both. I have done you a service, Alaric, and you know it, and you are going to sit back down, because your son is looking at the screen at the end of this table, and he has just understood that I am holding the only copy of a document that proves the great Halvard family climbed into bed with the man who murders his partners. He let that settle. 3 other families would pay a great deal for that document, Alaric. Some of them have wanted a reason to move on you for years, and you handed me one this morning, wrapped in your own inside man's blood." He let it land. "We are not signing today. We are going to talk about what it costs you to walk out of my city with your name still clean." And slowly, hating it, the old man sat back down. Afterward, when the room had emptied of everyone but the two of them, and the gray light came flat off the estuary through the high windows, Tamsin came down from the gallery for the last time, and stood across the long stone table from the man she had promised herself she would never again believe. She did not speak for a while. She was doing what she did best. She was reading the room, except the room was only him now, and she was reading it against everything she knew, and slowly, the way frost gives up a window. The truth of it was coming clear to her. And it was coming from evidence, not from anything he said, which was the only way it could ever have reached her. She had lain awake in the chandler's flat turning it over, the way she turned over everything, looking for the seam. And the seam was this: the facts of the night did not fit the words of the night. A man who meant what he said in that counting house would have gone home and slept. This man had come home, found her gone, and driven into a hostile quarter alone in the dark to put his own body between her and 3 of Bastien's oldest killers over a woman he had sworn, 4 hours before, that he would not even notice she was gone. People did not do that for filing cabinets. The words had said one thing. Everything he had done since had said the exact opposite, and Tamsin had spent her whole life trusting what people did over what they said. "Alaric never came for me," she said at last. Soren went still. "I have been thinking about it all night," she said. "If you had truly thrown me away in that room, if I were truly staff, truly replaceable, truly nothing, then when I walked out into the dark I would have been the safest woman in the city, because no one hunts a thing that does not matter. But that is not what happened. What happened is that Alaric's men never so much as looked at me, not once, from the moment you called me nothing." She lifted her eyes to his. "Because the moment you called me nothing," he stopped seeing a lever. "You did not throw me away, Soren. You took me off the board. You made me worthless to the only man who could have used me in the one language he understood. And you did it knowing I would hear it, and knowing I would believe it, and knowing it would break something in me you might never get back." "I knew," Soren said quietly. "It was the worst thing I have ever done, and I would do it again this morning because you are alive to accuse me of it. You could have told me it was coming." Bastien watched faces. He said, "And you are the best reader in the city. If I had let you know, you would have known. And if you had known, he would have seen you knowing. The only lie strong enough to shield you was the one that fooled you too." He did not move toward her. He had learned that much. "I told you at your window to remember that I came there. I told you to remember that I told you the truth. I knew even then I was about to hand you the cruelest lie of my life, and I could not warn you it was a lie without making it a weaker one." So I gave you one true morning to hold, and I prayed it would be enough of a thread to lead you back once the worst was done. It nearly was not, she said. That is the part you should be afraid of. If Alaric had come for me an hour sooner, if I had gone anywhere but the one place you happened to remember, your thread would have led you to a body. She said it without heat, which was how he knew it was true. You gambled my life on a single sentence. I whispered to you once, years ago, about a chapel. That is a terrible plan, Soren. She was quiet a moment. It is also the only reason I am standing here. So I find I cannot be as angry about it as it deserves. Tamsin looked down at the table, at the drive that had ended 11 years, at her own hands that had stopped, at last, their endless small ordering of the world. My father's name, she said. Her voice finally shook. Everyone in that room heard it. Everyone heard that he did not do it. They did, Soren said, and it goes wider than this room. By tonight, every family that ever spat at his memory will know they spat at an innocent man. You have carried him alone for 11 years. You can put him down now. He is cleared, he can rest, and so, God willing, can you. She thought of the small stone in the cheap end of the cemetery, the one she had visited before dawn for 11 years, so that no one would ever see her go, the one that bore his name, and beneath it, nothing at all, because a man blamed for selling a family does not get kind words carved under him. She thought of the new words she could put there now. The relief of it was so large, it did not feel like relief. It felt like a room she had spent her whole life bracing a door shut against, and the pressure on the other side had simply, finally, stopped. And that was when Tamsin Holt, standing in the cold light of the place where she had lost everything the night before, reached up, and with hands that would not stop trembling, began to unbutton the gray coat. Not one button, all of them. She undid the coat she had worn like armor for 11 years, the coat she had kept between herself and every room, so that she could always leave. And she took it off, and she folded it over her arm, and she stood in front of him, without it, at last a small unarmored woman who had finally decided to stay in a room without a way out. Soren looked at the folded coat the way another man might look at a surrender flag laid down after a war. Do not make me regret this, she said, and it was the most frightened and the most honest thing she had ever said to him. He did not reach for her, though every part of him wanted to. He had learned that her trust could not be taken, only earned, one verified fact at a time, and that a man who had broken her with a single sentence would have to be careful with his sentences for the rest of his life. So he gave her only one, and he made sure it was true before he spent it. Never, he said. And for once, she believed a word he gave her because she had checked it against the evidence, and the evidence was that she was standing there at all. The reckoning with Alaric Halvard did not happen with guns, in the end, which surprised the men who worked for both of them. It happened 3 days later, across the same stone table, with lawyers, and it was, Soren thought, far more final than a bullet. The alliance was dead. That was the first line and the easiest. There would be no marriage, no folded freight, and no Halvard fist around the river. Alaric would take his sons and his pen and his patient-eating eyes back north, and he would go quietly, because Soren held the one document in the world that proved the Halvard patriarch had conspired with a man who murdered his own principles. And that document had already been copied and sealed and placed with 3 separate families who did not love Alaric and would be delighted to have a reason. If Alaric ever moved product through the city, if his men ever crossed the line, if any harm ever came to a woman in a gray coat or the man beside her, the seals would break, and the whole northern world would learn exactly what Alaric Halvard had climbed into bed with. It was not a threat, it was a leash, and both men knew it, and that was worse. Alaric had come into the city 3 weeks earlier, intending to swallow it, and he left having signed a single page instead of the great contract he had planned, a page that said only that the Halvard family renounced all claim on the Vero holdings, and all presence in the city, in perpetuity. His sons had wanted to fight. Soren had watched the eldest do the same arithmetic his father had done at the signing table, and reach the same wall. There was no version of a war that ended with the sealed documents staying sealed. A gun could kill a man. It could not kill a truth that had already been copied 4 times and handed to his enemies. For the first time in his life, Alaric Hallvard was holding the losing side of a thing he could not shoot his way out of, and the knowing of it had aged him 10 years in 3 days. "You are not the empty man I took you for?" Alaric said at the end, gathering his coat. "That was your counselor's great error, and mine. He swore to me you loved nothing." He looked for a moment almost impressed. "He should have watched you at that signing. A man who loves nothing does not burn his own alliance to the ground to clear the name of a dead clerk." "She is not a clerk," Soren said. "No," Alaric agreed. "She is the most expensive woman in the north, and you paid for her." Gladly. He almost smiled, and there was something in it that was nearly respect. "Guard her better than I guarded my counsel." Word of the signing that did not happen moved through the city the way water finds every crack. By the end of the week, the story had reached every family that mattered, and it was not the one Alaric had meant to write. Soren Viro had let the Halvard patriarch walk all the way to the pen before he turned the table over, had exposed and ended a 30-year traitor in front of the man who bought him, and had done all of it to clear the name of a bookkeeper 11 years in the ground. Some thought he had gone soft. The smart ones understood the opposite. A man who will tear down his own alliance to keep faith with a dead innocent cannot be bought, and the thing that cannot be bought is the only thing in that world worth fearing. He had walked in a groom and walked out something nearer a king on the strength of a woman's 11-year patience and a drive the size of his thumb. There was one more thing, and it was Ravenna who asked for it. She came to Soren alone before her father's cars were loaded, the cold engineered beauty gone strangely soft at the edges, and she said, "You are not going to marry me. And I find I am glad, and I would like something in return for the trouble my family has caused you." She lifted her chin the way her father did. But the thing under it was not her father at all. "I would like to not go back north with him. I have spent my whole life inside that man's fist. You of all people understand what that is." Soren looked at the woman who had leaned into a camera light on the worst night of his life to tell him he should be frightened, the one warning in a house full of knives, and he understood that she had been trying to walk out of a room with no door for far longer than he had known her. "Stay," then he said. "The city is large." He almost smiled. "And I owe a debt to women who warn me." She looked at him a moment longer as though she might say something more, some softness her father had never allowed her to practice, and then she only nodded. Once, the way people nod when a door they had stopped believing in finally opens. It was enough. She went where she liked after that, and it is a different story, and a good one, but it is not this one. This one ends where it should, which is, quietly. It ends weeks later, in the house above the estuary that no longer felt sterile because someone had finally started leaving her things in it. A book face down on a chair, a second coffee cup, a gray coat hanging on a hook by the door where it stayed unbuttoned, unworn. Quote, not for leaving, but only because she had earned the right to keep whatever she wanted. She did not soften, all at once. That was not in her, and he would not have trusted it if it had been. For weeks she still woke before dawn, out of habit still counted the exits in every room, still kept her voice level and her heart behind glass. Trust, for a woman like her, was not a door thrown open, but 100 small locks, worked loose one at a time, and Soren learned a new kind of patience, not the patience of a man waiting to close his hand on a throat. He asked her questions that had nothing to do with him. He learned the name of the disused chapel and the cheap end of the cemetery, and the way she took her coffee, which he had never once thought to learn across 4 years of her bringing him his. Soren found her at the tall window one morning, watching the rail terminal wake, and he came and stood beside her, the way he had 1,000 times in 4 careful years, except that now there was no careful left in it. "Tell me what you heard," he said. It was an old habit, and he said it softly, and it did not mean the room anymore. Tamsin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I heard a man in a counting house say he would not notice if I walked away." She turned to him, and the dark eyes that missed nothing were for once not reading him for threats, only reading him, and then I heard everything underneath it. It took me a while. I am usually faster. She let one corner of her mouth turn up, but I heard every word, Soren. In the end, I heard all of them, even the ones you did not say out loud, especially those. It was the nearest thing to forgiveness she had in her to give, and they both knew what it had cost her to carry it out to him, one verified fact at a time. Across 3 weeks and a lifetime of learning that words were the cheapest thing a dangerous man owned. She had built her whole life to survive being thrown away. She had built nothing at all for being chosen, and she was learning it now the way you learn a language late, clumsily, and with her whole heart. He put his hand over hers on the cold sill, and she let him, and outside the gray city went about the business of being survived. There was no fairy tale in it. He was still a dangerous man, and she was still the woman who had spent 11 years learning to disappear, and the world they lived in would never be gentle. But he had learned the cost of the cruelest sentence a man can say, which is that you can say it to protect someone and still spend the rest of your life earning back the silence it leaves. And she had learned that the one room worth staying in is the one you no longer need a coat to leave. It was not safety. Exactly. Their world did not hand out safety. It was something better and harder to come by, which was a person who had seen the very worst you were capable of, aimed directly at her, and had stayed anyway to check the arithmetic. That is the danger of loving a woman who hears every word. Guard the wrong one, and you will give everything you own to be heard again. Soren Viro gave everything he owned. And the quiet one in the gray coat, the one everybody underestimated, the one he called nothing, to keep the whole world from noticing she was the only thing that mattered, hung the coat by the door and stayed. If this one got you, if you felt that counting house drop out of your chest the way it dropped out of hers, do something for me. Smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with the one person you know who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, when did you know he would never let her walk away? I read everyone. I hear every word. See you in the next one.